Great. So before we begin, I'd like to do a land acknowledgement. I'm based in Niagara, so I'm doing one for that area. And we begin by acknowledging the land on which we gather is the traditional territory of the Haudenosaunee and Anishinaabe peoples who have lived and tended these lands for millennia, many of whom continue to live and work here today. Our territory is covered by the Upper Canada Treaties and is within the land protected by the Dish with One Spoon Wampa Agreement. Today, this gathering place is home to many First Nations, Métis, and Inuit people. By acknowledging and reflecting on the heritage of this land we share, it reminds us of our responsibilities to fulfill the calls to action of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, and that we are responsible and accountable for making changes to support equity for the health, life, prosperity of Indigenous people across all of these territories. I'd just like to take a moment to thank everyone for joining our presentation today. Our speaker this afternoon is Dr. Marty Ross, who will be presenting on hacking Lyme disease action steps to recovery. Dr. Ross is a passionate Lyme disease educator and clinical expert. He helps Lyme sufferers and their physicians see what really works based on his review of the science and extensive real-world experience. Dr. Ross is licensed to practice medicine in Washington State, where he has treated thousands of Lyme disease patients in his Seattle practice using the best natural and prescription medicines. Dr. Ross is a publisher of numerous resources for those living with Lyme disease. These include Hacking Lyme Disease, an action guide to wellness, published in January 2023, the website Treat Lyme by Marty Ross, MD, the Ross Lyme Support Protocol, and a free weekly Lyme Q&A webinar called Conversations with Marty Ross, MD. Dr. Ross is a graduate of Indiana University School of Medicine and Georgetown University Family Medicine Residency. He's a member of the International Lyme and Associated Disease Society, the Institute for Functional Medicine, and the American Academy of Anti-Aging Medicine. We'll have Dr. Ross present, and then we'll open for questions from the audience at the end. And again, you can answer your questions by entering the chat box, or at the end, you can raise your hand and I'll call upon people to ask their questions then. So please join me and welcome Dr. Ross. Thank you.
Thank you. Let me go ahead and get my slides set up here. All right, and let me go, I have to get that set up into my slideshow view. Let's see. Well, it did it earlier. Hold on here just a minute. We tested this out earlier and it worked well. Now, why isn't it doing my slideshow?
Can you see the play from start? Yeah.
There we go. Got it. Okay. Thank you. Sorry about that. So I'm glad to be here, everyone. And Veronica, thank you for inviting me. And Ruth, thank you for helping out with this as well, too. So I'm Dr. Marty Ross, and many of you may be aware of the various resources I have out there in managing Lyme disease. And so I think I'm glad to be able to participate with you and share some insights that I've learned over the years for this virtual 2023 awareness event that the Canadian Lyme Disease Research Network is hosting. My talk is called Hacking Lyme Disease, Action Steps for Recovery. And so let's go ahead and get started here. In general, I'm going to probably talk about 40 minutes. And let me get my timer set so I make sure I don't go over that. And then we'll take some questions and answers after that as well, too. So for developing this talk, there's a lot of information, and I'm going to give you some resources that you can look at later to get specific dosing information, etc. So first of all, this is my Lyme disease information site called Treat Lyme by Marty Ross, MD. It's at treatlyme.net. On this website, you'll find my online Lyme guide. You can see it in this orange button up here. I organized, oh gosh, I have hundreds of articles here, or 100 or so articles here about anything you might want to know about managing Lyme disease, and I've organized it into various sections. One of the big parts of this website is my Lyme treatment protocol, which you can find under this green tab up here, and I'll be referencing this in one of the last parts of the talk today. And then most recently, I published a book called Hacking Lyme Disease, an action guide to wellness. You can find this at my store, Marty Ross MD Supplements, or it is also available on Amazon as well, too. This book is a compilation of nearly 40 key articles from my Lyme information site, treatlyme.net, It's organized into sections about things you should know before you start treating. It has a section on anti-germ action plans for each kind of germ that you might have. It has my Ross Lyme support protocol. It has a review of various alternative medicine treatments and what I think their chances of success are for you, working for you, things like Rife machines or even SOT therapy, for instance. And then it's got a section on key things you can do, key articles that can help you manage your care as well, too. All right, so what I want to talk about today, my roadmap for this discussion is to talk about 9 hacks you can do to improve your chances of recovery. And just as an overview, these are: make sure it's not mold toxicity. Number 2, identify infections that you have again and again and again. I'll explain what I mean by that in a second. Treat all locations and forms of Lyme. Number 4 is treat growing and persister hibernator germs at the same time. Number 5, if you have chronic Babesia or chronic Bartonella, break apart fibrin nest. Number 6, use oral peptides to repair damage. Number 7, reprogram your limbic system. Number 8, when possible, use herbal rather than prescription antibiotics to protect the gut microbiome. And number 9, fix key imbalances created by infections throughout the treatment for the best chance of recovery. And I could have also said number 9 could have been titled, antibiotics alone will not work. There's a lot of other stuff you have to fix to give the antibiotics the best chance of helping you, okay? All right, so the first hack 1. So make sure it's not mold toxicity, even if your Lyme or related infection test is positive. All right. So there's this condition called mold toxicity, and about 25% of us are susceptible to developing this problem. 25% of us have a genetic profile that sets us up so that if we breathe in mold toxins and they get absorbed through our lungs into our bloodstream, we can't get rid of them, okay? And that's 25% of all people, whether you have Lyme or don't have Lyme. When these mold toxins build up in a person, they trigger a reaction that looks a lot like Lyme disease. And the reason is both Lyme and mold toxicity trigger your white blood cells to make too many of a group of chemicals called cytokines. Cytokines are inflammatory chemicals made by white blood cells. They're good because they can turn the immune system on. But if they're made in excess, as they sometimes are in mold toxicity and Lyme disease, they will give you all of what we call mold toxicity and Lyme disease symptoms, like difficulty thinking, which some people call brain fog, body pain, fatigue, hormonal dysfunction, sleep disturbances. They can look identical, basically. All right, so how do you figure out if mold toxicity is something you might even want to deal with before you treat your Lyme? So I take a detailed history from my patients, and I'm always interested in where did they get sick? So if somebody tells me they had a tick bite and then they started developing all the symptoms we associate with Lyme disease, but it only happened after they moved into a new home that had black mold on the wall, well, that's a big clue that maybe the real problem is mold toxicity. And so here's the point I want to make. Just getting a Lyme test that's positive and having symptoms of Lyme does not mean it's Lyme. It could be mold toxin illness, and here's why. The major tests that we do to detect if you have Lyme measure whether you have an immune reaction to the Lyme. So Western blots, immunoblots, even Ellis spots, those tests all look, do you have an immune reaction? But an immune reaction doesn't tell you if the germ is still in you, all right? So you could have a positive Lyme test and have all the symptoms suggesting Lyme, but remember, those symptoms are really cytokine symptoms. And maybe what's really going on is your immune system got rid of the Lyme, but you still have Lyme symptoms because they're cytokine symptoms, and it's the mold toxins trapped in you that are the problem, okay? So I always want to look, especially if I've got somebody who's got this big story about they got sick when they moved into a certain house, or they didn't get sick until they found mold in their work location. Then what I want to do is I want to look to see if there's mold toxicity. And the way to do that is to look and do a urine test through a lab called Mosaic Diagnostics, which used to be called Great Plains Lab, or another lab called real-time labs. These do urine tests to see, are you peeing out more mold toxins than you should? Now, some physicians out there like to follow a protocol by a physician named Richie Shoemaker. Dr. Shoemaker is the doctor that discovered mold toxicity. The way he diagnoses mold toxicity is based on a certain number of inflammation tests. And if your inflammation markers are elevated, he automatically assumes it's mold toxicity without really looking to see, do you pee out excess mold toxins? The problem with the Shoemaker labs is they can be elevated from Lyme. So they're not really reliable as a way of looking to see if you have mold toxicity in Lyme, okay? And if you do find that you have mold toxicity, you want to remove those mold toxins. And I have countless stories in my practice where people came to see me. I'll give you a story. One person came to see me with his mother, who's a nurse, and been told by another physician in Seattle that he had such bad brain involvement of his brain that he needed to fly out to Washington, D.C. to see Dr. Jemsek and get IV antibiotics. This is a guy that had lost his family, lost his job. He had severe cognitive impairment, severe fatigue. And as I started taking his history, yeah, he had a positive Lyme test. He remembers vaguely he had a tick bite, but he didn't get sick until he had mold exposures in his home. We spent 4 months cleaning mold toxins out of him, and and he got 100% well. We never did anything about Lyme because I think his immune system had dealt with it, okay? Number 2, second hack. Identify which infections you have again and again and again. I emphasize that a few times. All right. So the problem with Lyme disease is that if you know you have Lyme, you tested positive, or somebody's determined you have Lyme disease, it is also possible what's giving you part of those symptoms are what are known as other tick-borne infections, or we call those the co-infections. The big two are Babesia and Bartonella. And sometimes in treatment, if you get too many yeast living in your intestines from being on antibiotics, they also will trigger cytokines, making it look like your Lyme is a lot worse, okay? Now, testing for Babesia, so in treating Lyme, it's like peeling the layers of an onion. Sometimes as you treat, the symptoms that would suggest to you that Babesia or Bartonella or even yeast overgrowth are there become more apparent as you clear the Lyme infection, okay? So how do you determine if you might have these? And so basically what I like to do, there's 2 ways. One, for all of these. For Babesia, the best test these days is to do a test through IGeneX called an immunoblot. The IGeneX immunoblot looks to see, is your immune system making antibodies against certain proteins found in the germ? And what makes it the best test is it looks to see if you have antibodies against the whole family of Babesia. And so it can find more kinds of Babesia, basically. By comparison, ELISpot from Armin and Infecto Labs only looks to see if you have antibodies against 2 strains, and they may miss the more predominant strain these days, which we think is something called Babesia oticoli. And obviously, if that test comes back positive, you treat. But testing is not perfect. And you can have Babesia and still have negative tests, okay? So in all of my treatments, even if testing is negative, I am monthly going to go back and review Babesia symptoms to see have they become obvious, all right? So Babesia symptoms would be things like night sweats, air hunger, migraines, headaches, frequent deja vu experiences, severe fatigue, red spots on your skin, racing heart, dizziness on standing easily. And if you have enough of these symptoms, you should treat for Babesia, even if these symptoms don't show up until 3, 4, 5 months down the road. And you need to keep asking every visit whether you might have these, or your physician should be asking, or if you happen to be self-treating, you need to be reviewing these on yourself periodically too. Okay. How to diagnose Bartonella? Again, the best test for Bartonella is this method called an immunoblot from IGeneX. What makes it the best test is it detects 4 specific strains, and in addition, it can detect the whole family. And we think there are actually 15 kinds of Bartonella that can infect you. ELISpot through Armin and Infecto Lab is not as good because they're only testing against 1 or 2 strains, not the whole family. They miss a lot of Bartonella, okay? So if your test does come back positive, though, treat. But if it does not, you need to periodically look at a person. I do in my practice, or again, if you're self-treating, look periodically to see somewhere in the treatment, do you start getting symptoms of Bartonella? And those would be common symptoms would be pain on the soles of your feet. Often that gets better when you walk in the morning. Severe thinking problems, neuropathies, syndromes like MS and Parkinson's, tremors, seizures, psychiatric problems, especially ongoing anxiety and air hunger. And if you have enough of these, even if testing was negative, even if it shows up 4 or 5 months down the road that you have symptoms like this, treat for Bartonella, okay? All right, and then finally, throughout a treatment, keep looking to see, is there too many intestinal yeast growing? The issue with intestinal yeast is that if you have too many yeast in your intestines, they will trigger the immune system to make too many cytokines, right? And so, as I said earlier, symptoms that Lyme symptoms are really too many cytokine symptoms. Mold can trigger too many cytokines. Yeast can also trigger too many cytokines. So there's some ways you can screen for intestinal yeast. And first of all, there is not a reliable blood test or a stool test. I know people do these, but they are not reliable. What I have found to be most reliable is at the beginning of treatment, you can use a yeast screening tool as an example. And if you score over 140 on the one I use, that would suggest you have too many yeast in your intestines at the beginning. You can find that yeast screening tool in my, let's see here. I'll circle it here. My Ross Lyme support protocol at treatlyme.net. Within that protocol, you can find the screening tool, okay? Now, after the beginning of treatment, that yeast screening tool is not as useful. And so what I usually will look at is periodically every month, I'm reviewing these yeast symptoms right here, all right? And so I'm going to look to see, is there any major worsening of symptoms? And if there is, you have to wonder, did too many yeast pop up from being on all those antibiotics, all right? Other things I'm going to look at is sugar cravings, gassiness and bloating, skin rashes or pimples or acne, or in women, vaginal itching or discharge. Now, the skin rashes and acne is very interesting. If you see somebody that suddenly develops a bunch of acne or worsening pimples, think yeast in the intestines. And what the issue is that too many yeast in the intestines release toxins that interact with the skin, leading to pimples or acne, okay? So for information about how do you treat these various issues, at treatlyme.net, which is Treat Lyme by Marty Ross, MD, or in my book, Hacking Lyme Disease, there are articles that I've written. One is called Kills and Prevents Yeast, a brief guide. One is called Kills Babesia, a brief guide. And the other one is Kills Bartonella, a brief guide. And all of these guides have both prescription and herbal medicine options that you can use to get well. Hack number 3, treat all locations and forms of Lyme. All right, so Lyme lives in different locations. It can either live outside of your cells or inside of the cells. So as you design a treatment, you need to make sure that what you're using can go inside and outside, okay? Number 2, the germ has different forms, appearances, what it looks like, okay? And so there's the spirochete. Many of you seen pictures of that. It looks like a corkscrew. There's also a microscopic cyst form of the germ. And then finally, there's a form that lives inside of cells, and we call that the L form. The L form probably loses its covering as it moves inside. So when you design a treatment for Lyme, generally it's going to require at least 2 prescription antibiotics or 2 herbal antibiotics, or a combination of a prescription antibiotic and an herbal antibiotic to deal with all these forms and to deal with all these locations. For some ideas on what those kind of treatments would look like, see the Ross Lyme Support Protocol or another article I've written called A Lyme Disease Antibiotic Guide. And you can find both of these at treatlyme.net and in my book called Hacking Lyme Disease. As an example, in the Ross Support Protocol, one of the ideas I gave you to treat Lyme would involve using clarithromycin to treat spirochete and intracellular Lyme, and the herb grapefruit seed extract to treat the cyst form of the germ, okay? And in my Lyme disease antibiotic guide, I give you 10 sample combinations, both herbal and prescription, that you could use that would address these different locations and forms, right? Hack number 4, treat growing and persister germs at the same time. So this is the newest buzz. This is the hottest item in the world of Lyme and has been for about the last 5 years or so now. And that is that we discovered, based on research that was done at Northeastern University initially in Boston, Dr. Lewis and his colleagues were able to show us that Lyme has the ability to go into hibernation. And so Lyme has growing state, and then Lyme can have a hibernating or persister state. And in this persister state, it ignores the standard antibiotics that we historically have used to treat Lyme. All right. Now, there's been subsequent research done at both Johns Hopkins University by Dr. Ying Zhang and his group there, and out in Stanford University by Dr. Rojadas, who discovered something called disulfiram can treat persisters. And they have also concluded that Lyme can form persisters. Bartonella can also form persisters too, and that was been based on research that was done out of Dr. Ying Zhang's group at Johns Hopkins University as well. Okay, now not to confuse this idea of terminology of forms and persisters. Okay, so a persister is not another form. All right, so the forms of Lyme, which are spirochete and cyst, can be growing, or they can be hibernating in persisters. Okay, so both spirochete and cyst can do that. All right, we're not so sure if intracellular Lyme can go into hibernation or not. And Bartonella doesn't have different forms. We just know that some of the germs can be growing, some can be persisting. Some of the lab experiments that have been done would suggest maybe 10% of the germs can be in a persister form. So we wonder, is it these persisters that keep people from getting well? Okay. And so most of us these days are trying to do things to treat persisters while we also have people on antimicrobials that will treat the growing forms of the germ. Right. So one of my go-to agents that I like to use to treat persisters is called liposomal cinnamon, clove, and oregano capsules. And this is based on research out of Johns Hopkins University that showed that cinnamon, clove, and oregano oils individually can do a good job of killing growing and persisting Lyme and growing and persister Bartonella. And so I introduced this product into my practice over 2 years ago. And now I include it as a starting point in most of my treatments. I use it as a third agent to treat Lyme. And I will use it as a third agent in a program to treat Bartonella. If you're going to use this, the product I like is a product by a company called Doctor Inspired Formulations. Their product is called liposomal cinnamon, clove, and oregano essentials. And I have people take 1 pill 2 times a day. Hopkins research published earlier this year also tells us that cryptolepis and Japanese knotweed also can be very useful against growing and persisting Lyme and growing and persisting Bartonella. It's interesting, is cryptolepis, we only thought until recently was good against Babesia, but it actually now we now know from laboratory evidence that it can be useful against Lyme. And in my practice, I have found it to be very useful too. Other options to deal with persisters during treatment would be methylene blue and dapsone. Both of those can help. These are prescriptions. They both can help with Lyme and Bartonella. And the disulfiram can be useful against Lyme, but not Bartonella. Johns Hopkins research has been very clear to us that it's not useful against Bartonella. And in my practice, I don't find it to be useful against Bartonella either. To learn more about how you incorporate agents to treat persisters and see some sample treatment programs or plans, take a look at the Ross Lyme Support Protocol, a Lyme Disease Antibiotic Guide, a Kills Bartonella Brief Guide, and How to Treat Persister Lyme and Bartonella. These are all articles at treatlyme.net, and they are individual chapters in my book, Hacking Lyme Disease, Action Steps to Wellness. All right. Hack number 5, if you have chronic Babesia or chronic Bartonella, break apart fibrin nest with lumbrokinase. All right, so let me talk about this. So there's been some laboratory evidence and microscope examples showing that both Bartonella and Babesia have the ability to combine themselves with a blood clotting protein that floats around in your blood called fibrin. Fibrin is used along with a type of cell called platelets to make blood clots whenever you get a cut or you need to stop bleeding. But fibrin also just circulates around regularly in the blood, and it can weave itself in and out of these around the Babesia and Bartonella germs, and you get these nests of Babesia or Bartonella or Babesia and Bartonella woven together with fibrin. And then these fibrin nests attach themselves to your blood vessel walls, and they become a place that's very difficult for the immune system to get at the germs. And also they become a place that's difficult for the antibiotics, herbal or prescriptions, to get in. So one of the things that's useful to break up the fibrin nest is an enzyme called lumbrokinase. And lumbrokinase is a group of enzymes that comes from the skin of earthworms. This is a crazy illness. Some of the things we have to do to get people well, but yes, we use earthworms. And I've seen some very, very impressive results adding lumbrokinase into my treatment. I probably started adding this in about 1.5 to 2 years ago now. And the dosing of it is either a 16 milligram or a 20 milligram pill. The 16 milligram dose is by a company called Allergy Research. The 20 milligram dose is by a company called Belugi. Either one of them works just as well, even though there's a milligram difference. And you want to take one pill 2 times a day. One thing I learned, I used to have everybody start at 1 pill 2 times a day, but now I have people work up to it, because as I add it in to a person's treatment, I tend to see some big Herxheimer reactions. So keep that one in mind as you consider adding this in. Okay, hack number 6, use oral peptides to repair damage caused by the infections if you are not getting better on antibiotics. Okay, so peptides are quite the rage in the world of Lyme right now. I would think that many of you probably have heard of them, but let me just give you an overview of what they are first, and then I'm going to talk about 2 of them here. So peptides are substances that are made naturally within our bodies. And they're made up of amino acids. All right. So many of you probably know proteins are made up of amino acids too. So you may wonder, well, what's the difference between a peptide and a protein? Well, it's an artificial designation, actually. Here in the States, our Food and Drug Administration has decided that if there are more than 40 amino acids, that's called a protein. And if there are less than 40 amino acids, that's called a peptide. If it's a protein, they regulate it as a drug. If it's not a protein, it's regulated a different way, but not technically as a drug. Okay, so it's an artificial designation. Now we know that there are approximately there have now been identified over about 100 different peptides that our bodies make. All right. And they all have different functions, but there are a number that you can use to help in Lyme, and I'm going to focus on 2 here. And so first of all, I focus mainly on oral peptides, not IV peptides, in my practice. And the reason is it's not clear if long-term here in the States, if the Food and Drug Administration is going to allow for IV administration. And because they're not technically FDA approved, in many states, medical boards would probably have a cow. Like in my state of Washington, medical board might have a cow. So I know there are many of my colleagues out there using IV peptides. I'm using orals because they classify more as supplements, and they're removed from regulation and medical board scrutiny in the same way that IV might. Okay, so BPC 157 is a peptide that I like to use to repair nerve injury, muscle and tendon injury, and ongoing pain. And it has been used for tons of years by athletes to repair injury from sports events. I have used it in my practice to help with neuropathies, and I've used it for people that have a lot of ongoing joint muscle pain and tendon injury problems as well too. I might start thinking about adding it in maybe 6 to 9 months into a treatment if people aren't getting any better, or if somebody comes to see me and they've already been under 1, 2, 3 years of treatment and they're still not showing marked improvement, I might consider doing BPC 157. You take it as 1 pill 2 times a day, need to give it at least 2 months to see if it's going to work, okay? It may also help with some brain injury repair as well too. But for people that have a lot of cognitive dysfunction related either to damage from infections or from head trauma, the peptide I like to use for that is this one called cerebalysin. Cerebalysin is available in a pill form manufactured by a company called Integrated Peptides. Their product for cerebalysin is called Cerebaprep. Their product for BPC-157 is called BPC-157, okay? Now the cerebalysin, Cerebapep, you want to take as 1 or 2 pills 1 time a day. And I'm primarily using that for people that have severe cognitive impairment, thinking problems, and that we've been 6-9 months, maybe longer, on antibiotics and it's not budging. I may add in some cerebalysin. I like to give it also about a 2-month trial to see if it's going to work, okay? You can use BPC-157 and cerebalysin together. The major drawback to both of those is they are expensive. And I carry both of these at my supplement store. I acknowledge they're expensive. The trouble is the manufacturer will not allow us to sell under a certain price. So you'll see that there. So if you're looking for more ideas about what to do with peptides, at least the oral peptides, take a look at my article called Key Oral Peptide Strategies to Repair and Restore in Lyme Disease and Mold Toxicity. You can find that at my Lyme information site, or you can find it in the chapter in Hacking Lyme Disease, my book. Right. Hack number 7, train your limbic system to release infection-triggered brain reactivity that perpetuates your symptoms after being on antibiotics. So there's a part of the brain called the limbic system. And sometimes as a result of having chronic Lyme, it gets turned on. It doesn't turn off. And in a turned on state, it can cause a lot of your fatigue, a lot of your body pains, a lot of the thinking dysfunction that goes on, and a lot of the anxiety and stress that some people have as well too. This area of the brain is what governs your fight or flight responses. It also is the area of the brain that's in charge of your emotional responses and behaviors, and even survival behaviors, feeding and reproduction, for instance, as well too. All right. So again, in Lyme disease, in some people, it just gets turned on. So if I've got somebody that I've treated for Lyme for maybe a year, 2 years, after we've done a good job of doing all the things we need to do with antimicrobials and fixing all the other things that balancing all the damage and the imbalances created by Lyme, and we've done that for a year or 2, and somebody's still not getting well, then I'm going to think about having a person try some of these limbic system retraining options. All right. And so the 2 main programs that are out there, one is a program called the Gupta program, and the other one is called Dynamic Neural Retraining System, also known as DNRS, from Annie Hopper. And these are both online programs. If there's a little bit of a difference, and they're both basically giving you methods you can do to kind of calm that limbic system down. In terms of their how they operate, DNRS by Annie Hopper is more of like a boot camp. So a little bit more of an aggressive method. The Gupta method would be more of a gentle, more in line with the Buddhist kind of method, at least that's what I'm hearing from my patients, but either one can work depending on who you are. If you try an Annie Hopper and it's just too aggressive for you, look at a Gupta program, for instance, too, okay? So if you're not interested in doing these, sometimes having a meditative practice can be helpful, and sometimes counseling can be helpful as well, too. Hack number 8, when possible, use herbal rather than prescription antibiotics to protect the gut microbiome. All right, so now this is an issue to think about. So the gut is made up of tons of germs, so bacteria, viruses, and parasites, all right? And yeast, even healthy yeast live in the intestines. And all of these microbes that live in the gut have functions. We are just discovering how important this microbiome is and what it does. And in fact, if you look at research, the amount of research in the last 5 to 10 years is just taking off astronomically in this area of the gut microbiome. So we know that the gut microbiome regulates the immune system, signals healthy brain function, helps with food digestion, removes toxins, and things we're allergic to, and can provide a lot of other healthy body regulating functions. It's like its own organ in a sense, right? In fact, let me put it in context, 90% of our body's genetic material is in the gut microbiome, 90%. So we don't just let these germs ride around, get a free ride from us. We're getting something from it. And that's all these functions that I just told you about, all right? So the risk in managing Lyme, whether you're going to use herbal or prescription antibiotics, is you're going to cause some injury of that microbiome. And there is a theory that one of the reasons people have a hard time recovering from Lyme, and the reason they're not doing well after a year or 2 years, is that some of that may be due to gut microbiome injury, okay? Now, it's a theory. We don't have a lot of solid science on that, but I think it's a valid theory. So because of that, what I try to do in my practices is choose an option that is the least harmful to the gut. Now, granted, if you've got raging Bartonella, raging Babesia, raging Lyme, you got to kill the germs. But there is the risk you're going to harm the gut as well, too, all right? So all things being equal, herbal antibiotics are much less destructive to the gut microbiome than prescription antibiotics. So one of the things I like to do is I will discuss with my patients whether we should try herbal antibiotics and see how well that's going to work for them, either at the beginning or after we do some good germ killing with prescriptions, we might go to the herbal route, okay? Put that in context. Herbal antibiotic options for the Lyme germ can work about 85 to 90% of the time, which is the same success chance I give most prescription antibiotic combinations. For Bartonella, prescription antibiotic combinations will work about 80 to 85% of the time, any two you put a person on, and the herbal options work about 5 to 10% less, which is still pretty good. And Babesia, usually about 80 to 85% of the time, a Babesia prescription option will work, versus the herbal options will work about 5 to 10% less than that as well, too. So it's worth a shot giving the herbal options a try to protect the gut, all right? So for herbal antibiotic option, and then the other thing to protect the gut, I like to suggest people be on a good probiotic regimen during treatment, okay? So for ideas on what herbal options you could use, take a look at each of my killing guides. So there's a Lyme disease antibiotic guide, there's Kills, a Babesia brief guide, Kills Bartonella, a brief guide, and you can find them at my Lyme information site, treatlyme.net, or Hacking Lyme Disease. In terms of probiotic strategies for something more detailed, take a look at my article called Probiotic Strategies in Lyme Disease Treatment, and you can find that at treatlyme.net or as a chapter in my book called Hacking Lyme Disease. Okay, let me see where we are time-wise. That's pretty good. 34 minutes. We got about 6 minutes to go through a lot. But as you can tell, I'm giving you references that you can look at down the road. Okay, so hack number 9, I would probably call this one of the most important hacks. And that is that throughout treatment, you need to fix infection-related imbalances while killing the infections with herbal prescription antibiotics, okay? And the majority of my Ross Lyme support protocol, the first 10 steps of that protocol, are devoted to things you should do to balance yourself. Even before in the protocol, I get to steps 11 and 12 that talk about Lyme treatments and Bartonella antibiotic regimens. The first 9 to 10 steps of my protocol are all things you should do to fix the mess created by the germs so that your antibiotics have a better chance of working and you have a better chance of getting well, okay? So the first one that you want to do, and so anyhow, let me just skip through this part. The key point here is antibiotics alone often fail, okay? And my protocol is a lot more extensive because I address all of these other areas that are out of balance versus the IDSA, ILADS, and even CDC guidelines do not, okay? My protocol is designed to boost the immune system, improve detoxification, speed recovery, kill the infections, and protect and repair from the harmful effects of infections and antibiotics, all right? So the first step in my protocol is get sleep. Now, this may sound ridiculous, and some of you are probably thinking, oh my God, how am I ever gonna get sleep? But I try to have a goal of people getting 7 to 9 hours of sleep. Sleep is often disturbed in Lyme due to the excess cytokines. They disturb your sleep centers. Be aware that getting sleep makes your pain better, can make your fatigue better, can help your immune system work better, and getting sleep lowers those inflammatory cytokines, all right? So one of the things you should do in treatment is focus things to get sleep. In my protocol, I give a couple starting herbal combinations to look at. You could either look at L-theanine, or you could do an herbal sleep combination. And here in this slide, I'm giving you a number of herbs you might find in that combination. So for instance, there's a company called Karuna that has a product called Sleep Formula that has a number of these herbs in it, okay? All right. And again, because of time, I'm going to kind of walk through this quickly, but you can find all of these dosing recommendations in my Lyme treatment protocol online, okay? Prescriptions you could look at using would be Zopiclone in Canada, or Ambien in the States, or Trazodone. I like Trazodone because it's not a habit forming at all. And generally for most people, it does a good job. It's actually a medicine that is used in depression. And even if you have doctors that are hostile to managing Lyme, your primary care docs might be willing to prescribe Trazodone if you need it. Number two, work with a diet that tends to be low inflammatory. And you can either do that by using a plant-forward paleo diet or an elimination diet, okay? Elimination diet is something you might consider if you're having a lot of food reactivity. It helps you pinpoint what to remove from your diet so you're not reacting anymore. So in terms of sources that you can look at, in terms of a paleo-based diet, rich in organic foods, healthy fats, proteins, and vegetables, take a look at my article called The Best Brain Inflammation, Pain, and Energy and Detox Diet Ever at treatlyme.net. And for an elimination diet resource, there's one called Elimination Diet to Find Food Problems, and that's at treatlyme.net too, okay? Number three, lower cytokines. And again, I reviewed with you earlier all the problems cytokines cause, and that's what this slide goes over again. But the things that I like to have people do to lower cytokines are to be on an herbal option that will do that. My favorite is curcumin in a liposomal format, or a combination product that has a number of anti-cytokine herbs in it. And the one that I like using is a product by Research Nutritionals called Cytoquil, all right? In terms of prescription options, there really aren't many, all right? So again, you got to get sleep. You've got to eat a healthy diet that's low inflammatory, and you want to lower cytokines. Fourth thing I suggest is that people work with herbs that are called adaptogens. Adaptogens are designed to help the body deal with stress. All right, and the one that I like using is one called ashwagandha. And I usually have people dose it as a couple pills in the morning and 2 pills between 1 and 2. Research suggests it probably helps the adrenals and thyroid work better, right? Number 5, look to see if you have low adrenal or low thyroid. And you can do that with testing, or you can do that based on symptoms, because sometimes the testing isn't accurate and people have what is known as subclinical low thyroid or subclinical low adrenals, okay? Now, in my protocol and on this slide, I give you symptoms to consider that would suggest low adrenals or low thyroid. So for low adrenals, well, anyhow, I'll just list them here. I know I'm going to start running low on time here. But anyhow, take a look at that list. You can find it at my website, treatlyme.net, okay? If you have enough of either of these symptoms, I suggest doing things to correct your hormones. For adrenals, you can look at ashwagandha, or you could look at a prescription called Cortef. For thyroid, ashwagandha can be helpful, and zinc, selenium, and iodine are helpful as well too. And a prescription medicine for thyroid would be desiccated thyroid or something called Armour thyroid. I prefer over Synthroid. All right, number 6, be on a good multivitamin. Multivitamin just helps every organ in the body function better and helps with detoxification. Number 7, support detoxification and don't put toxins in, all right? So in terms of not putting toxin in, try to eat organic foods, avoid gluten, scent, alcohol, and tobacco, decrease emotional stress, those emotional toxins, and then support your liver detox using glutathione, liposomal glutathione. So glutathione is very poorly absorbed unless it's mixed up liposomally. The product I like for that supports the liver detox is a product made by Research Nutritionals called Trifortify. They've got good science showing good absorption on that. Number 8, exercise to tolerance. Now, not everyone can exercise. And the key thing about exercise is it improves blood flow to your tissues. raises chemicals called endorphins and encalphins that can help your immune system work better. But if you overdo it, you're going to pay a price. So when I say exercise tolerance, it means find a level you can do for which you don't pay the price the next day. At the beginning of treatment, that may be nothing. As treatment advances, it may be a 5-minute walk, but find an activity you like to do and do that. Part 9 of my protocol looks at immune boosters, and basically, I don't put people on immune boosters. Basically, getting sleep, lowering cytokines, detoxing, being on an adaptogen, fixing your hormones, killing the infections, exercising is tolerated, and eating right will boost your immune system, okay? And then finally, number 9 in my protocol talks about things you should do to prevent yeast from growing too much, all right? So I know I kind of went fast through that, but again, I've given you lots of resources to go back and look at, okay? So again, the resources that you can look at, number 1, I mentioned a number of herbs that I recommend. You could put, this is my, my store, in this search bar right up here. If you're interested in knowing what I consider to be high quality products that have actually worked with my patients, and that's the hard part about supplements, is finding stuff that actually is quality and will work. If you're interested to see what I use, just put it in the search bar and see what products show up there. In terms of a book, take a look at my book called Hacking Lyme Disease. You can get it at my site here, or you could buy it on Amazon. In terms of a very good resource in terms of any problem you might have in Lyme disease, take a look at my website called Treat Lyme by Marty Ross, MD, and hit this mega menu here under the online Lyme guide, and you'll see all the way I've organized the various articles I've written. And then finally, under this tab, the Lyme protocol is where you'll find my whole guideline where you can read carefully the dosing. And again, the whole website's accessible for free, okay? All right, and with that, that's my presentation.
Thank you very much. That was great, very informative, and I really appreciate, I know I appreciate the resources available because it was a lot of information. So thanks for sharing all that. There is one question in the chat. It says, you didn't mention heavy metal toxicity. Has this been overemphasized by other Lyme experts?
Yes, I think it has been. In managing Lyme disease, we're looking at a total load phenomenon. In other words, there's a lot of things that add together that contribute to the health problem, all right? And my protocol really emphasizes the ones that I have found to give the biggest bang. So correcting sleep, lowering cytokines, fixing hormones. In general, over time, I used to do a lot of testing for heavy metals. And when I would find that people would have elevations, I would try to remove them. But in terms of actually getting real meaningful help from that, not really. I don't find it to be that useful in terms of all the things that are causing the illness. And keep in mind, when you've got Lyme and you have all these other imbalances, you don't have to fix every problem. You just got to fix enough that the ship starts to float again, basically, all right? And I just find low bang for the buck by going after heavy metals. Now, I will test for heavy metals under one situation, and that is if I've got somebody with bad neuropathy that doing all those things I just mentioned in my protocol and even doing peptide therapies, none of that improves the neuropathy, then I might start looking at heavy metals in those situations.
Thank you. The other question was, are you convinced that Borrelia can form biofilm or survive for long times because of persisters?
I am well, that's a very good question. As I said about the persisters, it's the current vogue idea. And those of you that have been around Lyme long enough, you know that we tend to all move as a herd in one direction periodically after something we think will be the magic answer, and then we go in other directions. But this one, I have actually found some good benefit. And I do think that hibernators are something we should address, that for some people give them great improvements and could be the missing link to keep that. So I do think from what I'm seeing clinically, the aspect of biofilm, a biofilm is persisters can be in a biofilm. A biofilm is not necessarily a persister. So a biofilm is a slime, mucopolysaccharide slime layer that covers germs, that's held together in a fibrin protein skeleton. And within that fibrin nest, there's communities of different kinds of bacteria that aren't even Lyme bacteria that have a whole host of functions. And those can be broken apart, believe it or not, by just regular antibiotics. Although everyone says you should do something separate for biofilm, you don't necessarily need to, because the data says that even regular antibiotics can sometimes break through biofilms. The cinnamon clove oregano I talked about is great at breaking up biofilms, and that lumber kinase that I was talking about to deal with these fibrin nests can also help break down biofilm as well too.
Thank you. Another question came in is, have you looked at other potential drugs based on iridin, sorry if I'm saying that wrong, irisis plants with isoflavones and other active ingredients?
Read that to me again. I didn't quite catch that.
Yeah, sorry, and I'm probably mispronouncing it. Have you
Yeah.
looked at other potential drugs based on iridin, IIRIDIN, iris?
Oh, no, I'm not
Plant?
familiar with that. I'm not familiar with that. You know, it's interesting is I have a weekly free webinar, an hour-and-a-half question and answer session. And people bring new ideas to me all the time. So I'll have to look into that one. I'm just not familiar with it.
Okay, thank you. That's all I'm seeing in the chat. I don't know if anyone else has any questions. If you want to put something in the chat or raise your hand and unmute yourself, or give it a minute to see if anyone else comes up with questions. I know it's been a lot of information. It's great. Okay, I'm not seeing any other questions. So I think Veronica, I don't know if you want to pop on and say a few words, but thank you very much, Dr. Ross, for your information.
You're welcome.
Yes, thank you again, Dr. Ross, for your presentation today. Thank you to Ruth for doing an amazing job at helping to moderate today. Our Q&A and doing the introductions. I just wanted to remind everybody that we will be continuing our series of discussions. Our next presentation is in Thursday, 2 days, on May 25th at 12 p.m. Eastern Time. Dr. Natasha Bowser will be presenting on the topic of, give me 1 second, my people panel was just over top of the title. Dr. Natasha Bowser will be presenting on how are Canadians adapting to the emergence of ticks and tick-borne diseases? So again, that presentation is this Thursday, May 25th at 12 p.m. Eastern Time. And then we wrap up our series of Lyme and tick-borne disease talks. Next week, we have 3 presentations on Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday. A reminder to take part in our challenge, wear green, take a photo and share it with us to help spread awareness of Lyme disease and tick-borne diseases. If you don't like your photo taken or have some beautiful artwork, you can take photos of your artwork that express what you think Lyme disease and tick-borne disease awareness month is all about. So send in your artwork, whether it's poetry, drawing, sketches, pottery. All photos entered will be automatically entered into draw for one of 4 $25 Starbucks e-gift cards. And our live draw will be occurring on May 31st at 1 o'clock following our last presentation. And you can send your photos to clydern@gmail.com along with your name and email. And finally, just a reminder that the TICNET Canada Scientific Symposium will be holding its inaugural symposium conference in Toronto, Ontario, October 24th and 25th. The planning committee is just fine-tuning the details, and we will be opening up registration abstract submission on June 1st. So we hope to share next week the registration link with you all to sign up for our scientific symposium. That's all I have to share today. I do again want to thank Dr. Ross for joining us today and taking this time. I know he's quite busy. Again, thank you to Ruth and thank you to our audience for continuing to join us for our daily presentations. I hope everybody has a great rest of your day and a great rest of your week, and we'll hope to catch you on Thursday. Take care.
Thank you. Bye-bye.